The wind had never sounded like that before. It carried no sand, no ash, no whisper of storms, only a dry metallic rattle, faint and deliberate, like the dragging of chains over stone. The sentries said it was the wind catching the wire. The commissar said it was nonsense. But the Vox operators heard it too. Between bursts of static and coded prayer, they swore something was breathing through the frequency bands, a rhythm that matched no weather or machine. On the ramparts of Outpost Callistus, where the banners of the Astra Militarum hung limp and frayed, the men began to flinch when the air moved. They had been waiting for months, stationed at the edge of a dead plain, guarding a horizon that no longer changed. The manufactorums were silent. The supply convoys never came. The rations thinned, and so did the ranks. The air was cold, sharp with promethium smoke from the trenches, and the only light came from the distant glow of the fortress reactor, a relic more ancient than the regiment itself. Yet still they held their posts, still they prayed to the Emperor whose light could not reach them through the storm. And then one night, the wind began to speak. Not in words, not even in sound, but in the deep marrow of those who listened too long. When the chainsong rose across the wastes, men began to dream of things buried beneath the rockcrete. Some awoke screaming, others never woke at all. If you walk the edge of the Imperium long enough, you'll hear their story too. The soldiers who stood watch on a world already lost, who heard the chains long before they saw what was coming. If these echoes of the forgotten stir something in you, the silence, the endurance, the fear, then stay with us. Subscribe your vigilance and let their memory march beside yours, so that what was buried in the dark does not vanish again. The fortress of Callistus stood alone against the horizon, a black silhouette carved into a sea of white ash. The wind moved ceaselessly through its broken crenellations, hissing through the wire, humming in the barrels of forgotten guns. There had been a time when the walls trembled beneath the thunder of landers and the clatter of tanks rolling out into the wastes. That time had passed. Now only the banners moved, faded to gray, the Imperial Aquila little more than a ghost above rusted battlements. Lieutenant Varric stood the dawn watch, his eyes following the eastern ridge where the sun tried to rise through the haze. He could not remember when the sky had last been clear. The Voxcasters buzzed and stuttered at his back, their operators slumped in fatigue. He knew most of them by name, men who had once sung the hymns of the Emperor with conviction, now whispering them like half-forgotten lullabies. They all pretended not to hear the wind. The last resupply had come 87 days ago. Since then, silence. Even the astropath's chamber was sealed. The psyker inside had begun to scream in binary, his mind fracturing into machine code before the Medicaid dosed him into stillness. They buried him beneath the parade ground, marking the grave with his own broken Vox helix. No one said a word about it. Varric ran his glove across the frost-coated parapet, tracing the faint grooves where last fire had once struck. He wondered what they had been defending against then. The outpost log spoke of insurgents, heretics, Xenos raiders, the usual litany of threats catalogued by generations of soldiers who had never lived long enough to know which one would finally come for them. Below, the trenches steamed faintly in the cold. Men moved through them like ghosts, faces wrapped in rags, lasguns slung without care. Commissar Hest moved among them with the slow, patient tread of a man long accustomed to despair. He carried his bolt pistol in one hand, a book of devotionals in the other. Every dawn he read the same passage. Faith endures not because it is rewarded, but because it must. The men pretended to listen. Varric admired that. Pretending was the only kind of courage left. When the first chain sound came that morning, it was faint enough to be mistaken for machinery. A loose wire, perhaps, a turbine blade catching in the wind. The Auspex screens flickered once, then steadied. Varric leaned closer, listening. There it was again, metallic, rhythmic, distant. He looked toward the plain and saw nothing but dust. He thought to call it in, but something in the air held him still. A thin, expectant pressure, as if the entire fortress was holding its breath. Then the Vox emitted a burst of static that formed for half a heartbeat into a sound that might have been a word. Not High Gothic, not any human tongue, just a tone that curled beneath comprehension, familiar in a way that frightened him. Varric tore the headset away. The operator stared at him, pale. "Did you hear it, sir?" he whispered. Varric hesitated. "Wind on the line," Nothing more. But even as he said it, he could feel it in his teeth, the faint vibration of something enormous moving beneath the ground. By nightfall, the regiment had forgotten it. There was always another noise, another malfunction, another superstition to feed the long hours. The Mechanicus priest, Magos Kellen, spent the evening anointing the reactor core with incense and sacred oils, muttering binary canticles to appease its machine spirit. He claimed the Auspex ghost were the residue of old data echoes. The chain sound, he said, was nothing more than vibration from the deep drills below the manufactorum sublevels. But Kellen's own servo-skull kept twitching toward the horizon, its optical sensors blinking out of rhythm, its vox repeating a single fragmented syllable. Stus. Stus outpost. Callistus slept uneasily. The sky pressed low, heavy with invisible weight. Somewhere in the wastes, metal scraped against stone, and the wind carried it like a whisper through every corridor of the fortress. By the fourth day, the sound had entered their sleep. It threaded through dreams like a pulse, distant but steady, the clinking rhythm of unseen labor beneath the stone. In the mess hall, soldiers spoke of it in half-jests, claiming it was the echo of the Emperor's forges beneath the planet's crust. Others spat at the notion and tightened their flak collars as if to ward off the chill that came with the thought. Even Commissar Hest, though unflinching, had begun to twitch his eye toward the walls when the wind rose. The routines continued because they had to. Patrols through empty trenches, maintenance drills on laser guns that hadn't fired in months, liturgies to the machine spirit. The sound became background, part of the rhythm of survival, ignored the way one ignores the beat of one's own heart. But it grew louder, subtle at first, then more deliberate, as though it were approaching. Magos Kellen filed formal reports to the command relay, all unanswered. He recalibrated the Auspex arrays, praying over the circuits until the candles burned low. The readings returned impossible results, seismic fluctuations beneath stable bedrock, void signatures flickering between dimensions. When he presented them to Varric, the lieutenant only nodded wearily. They had both seen stranger things in the Emperor's service. But this felt different, wrong not in degree but in essence. That night, Varric took his rounds through the lower habs. The air smelled of promethium and cold metal. Lights flickered overhead, struggling to feed from the aging power grid. In one of the corridors, he found a servitor motionless, its body stiff, its mouth open in a silent scream. Inside its chest cavity, the sacred cogitator had melted into slag, the metal patterned with concentric rings, like ripples from a stone dropped into a pond. He called for Kellen. The Magos arrived with his retinue of drone lights and stood over the body without speaking. Pattern of resonance, he said at last, his voice distorted through the vox grill, but not mechanical. Varric frowned. Meaning what? Meaning the song beneath the world has found a conductor. Outside, the temperature dropped sharply. Ice formed along the inner walls. Men woke shivering, unable to recall what had woken them. The chain sound was constant now, vibrating through the ferrocrete like a pulse. They could feel it through their boots, in their bones. Some began to hum with it unconsciously, their voices merging with the rhythm until Commissar Hest ordered the offenders confined to the infirmary. By morning, one of them was gone. The bed was empty, sheets soaked with condensation, and a trail of frost led from the infirmary door to the northern rampart. A sentry swore he had seen a figure walking into the wastes, unarmed, bareheaded, vanishing into the storm. The following evening, the fortress reactor faltered. Its hum deepened into a bass tremor that shook dust from the ceilings. Warning lights pulsed crimson through the corridors. Kellen descended into the reactor chamber, chanting machine litanies as he worked. Varric followed, unwilling to let the Magos go alone. They found the chamber alive with motion. Thin filaments of light pulsed through the conduits, crawling across the walls like veins. The main core throbbed in steady rhythm with the sound outside, each metallic clang answered by a flicker of golden radiance. For a moment, the two stood frozen, listening. It was not random. It was communication. Kellen raised his mechadendrites, scanning. The vox within the chamber hissed once and cleared. A single phrase spilled through, soft, broken, almost human. We remember. Varric stepped back. Who said that? Kellen didn't answer. His optical lenses dilated wide. It knows the language of recall, he whispered. Not ours. The machines. The world itself is remembering. They sealed the chamber. When they returned to the upper levels, the fortress was silent again. Even the wind had stopped. The soldiers watched the sky with hollow eyes, afraid to speak, afraid the air would answer. And then, in that perfect stillness, the first chain rattled audibly across the plain. Close now, impossibly close, as if dragged just beyond the walls. Varric gave the order to double the sentries, though every man already stood at his post. The Emperor's light, they prayed, would find them before the sound did. When the dawn came again, it came blood-red. The light bled across the clouds, turning the world into a landscape of rust and shadow. The soldiers stared at it from the battlements, too tired to pray, too frightened to speak. The sound was everywhere now, not just in the wind, but in the walls themselves. Every bolt, every girder, every gun mount carried the same dull vibration, as though the fortress had become a vast, resonating instrument for something deep below. Varric hadn't slept. His hands trembled when he lifted his mug of recaf, and the steam coiled upward like smoke from a pyre. Commissar Hest approached, his greatcoat snapping in the cold wind. "You've heard it too," the commissar said quietly. It wasn't a question. Varric only nodded. "The men think it's ghosts," Hest continued. "Some say the souls of the buried Manufactoria workers are dragging their chains through the dark. Others claim it's the warp pressing against the world. I've shot 2 for spreading fear. It made no difference." Varric looked toward the wastes. "Have you ever wondered if the Emperor still listens to us out here?" Hest's eyes narrowed. "Faith is not a conversation, Lieutenant. It's obedience. We hold until we are told otherwise. And if no one ever speaks again, then we die as we lived and in service." It should have sounded righteous. Instead, it sounded like surrender. That night, a storm rolled across the plain, black and electric. Lightning danced over the horizon, revealing for split seconds the terrain below, and something else. In one flash, Varric saw it clearly. A network of fissures spreading outward from the fortress foundations like veins of molten gold beneath the crust. For a heartbeat they glowed, then vanished back into shadow. Kellen confirmed it hours later. The seismographs had gone wild. The tremors weren't natural. They were rhythmic, patterned, deliberate. "It is as though the planet itself is breathing," he said, his mechanical eyes reflecting the candlelight. The following cycle, the outer trench collapsed. 6 men were buried alive. 3 were recovered, their bodies rigid and covered in a thin film of frost, eyes open and unseeing. The medic reported no signs of suffocation or trauma. Their hearts had simply stopped mid-beat. The corpses were moved to the chapel for last rites, but when the priest tried to anoint them with holy oil, the liquid froze solid on contact. Varric stood watch that night again. The wind was sharper now, cutting through armor and bone alike, and through it all came the steady mechanical rhythm. Clang, pause, drag, clang. The sound of something vast and methodical beneath the ground. He pressed his ear to the wall. The vibration was stronger now, almost warm, like a living pulse. The fortress lights flickered once more and dimmed. For a long moment, the only illumination came from the reactor glow seeping through the floor gratings. Shadows lengthened, and in them Varric thought he saw movement, figures pacing where none should be. He blinked, and they were gone. At 0300 hours, the Vox flared again. A garbled transmission, indecipherable except for one phrase, repeated 3 times. "Chains remembered. Chains remember." By the time Hest and Kellen reached the control room, the message had already burned itself into the data slates, scarring the surface like an etching. No one could erase it. Varric stood by the viewport, staring into the dark where the chain sound began. He could almost see it now, the shimmer of motion beneath the dust, the faint, glinting suggestion of movement just beyond visibility. The plane shifted, breathing, and then the ground gave a long, low sigh. Every lamp in Outpost Callistus flickered and died. The air grew heavy, almost liquid. For one eternal moment, the fortress seemed to tilt, not physically but spiritually, as though the world itself had turned its gaze upon them. When the power returned, nothing had changed. Yet everyone knew the truth. Something had awakened. Varric looked at Hest, and neither man spoke. In the silence, the chain song began again, closer than ever, echoing through the bones of the fortress, measured and patient, as though whatever waited below had all the time in the galaxy. The stillness before had ended. By the 7th night, no one spoke above a whisper. The fortress had become a vessel for sound, a hollow shell that trembled with the rhythm of whatever labored beneath it. Even the air seemed thicker now, each breath dragging across the lungs like smoke. The men slept in shifts, but rest no longer brought peace. Dreams came instead. Visions of rusted cathedrals buried in sand, of oceans made of iron dust, of figures walking the plains with chains wound through their flesh. Lieutenant Varric moved through the barracks in silence, checking each bunk by candlelight. He found Private Loran muttering in his sleep, fingers twitching, lips shaping words that weren't his own. When Varric leaned close, he heard the pattern. A litany, but not imperial. It had rhythm, not meaning. A language born of sound itself. He woke the man. Loran's eyes rolled upward, pale and bloodshot. "Sir, it's coming through the wind," he whispered. "It's trying to remember its name." In the command chamber, the Vox arrays screamed with static. Kellen worked without pause, his mechanical limbs darting between cogitators, patching in relays, rerouting power through sanctified conduits. Every frequency carried noise, but hidden beneath it, a pattern. Not random, ordered, almost structured. When filtered through the auspex, it resembled a voice print, a waveform that pulsed like a heartbeat. "It's communicating," Kellen said, his tone more reverent than afraid. "Not with words, with resonance. Each pulse carries data, impossible amounts. It's rewriting the world in frequency." Commissar Hest frowned. "You're suggesting the wind has a language?" "The wind, Commissar, is merely the surface. The speaker is beneath us." The men stared at him in silence. That night a storm broke across the horizon, thunder without lightning, the air itself roaring as though the atmosphere were tearing apart. The chain song rose with it, clearer now, every note distinct. It was not one chain, but thousands, each moving in rhythm, each striking some unseen surface below the plains. The vibration shook dust from the ceiling, shattered glass in the upper habs. Vox units sparked, filling the corridors with the stench of ozone. Varric stood at the battlements with Hest and watched the storm roll toward them. The dust rose in pillars, columns of darkness marching across the land. Through his magnoculars, he thought he saw something inside the storm. A glimmer of metal, a shape like a tower, then gone. A sentry shouted from the east wall. Movement in the wastes. Every spotlight swung toward the plain. For a moment, the storm's veil lifted, revealing forms, human silhouettes or something close. Dozens of them walking upright, their outlines distorted by heat and distance. Some dragged chains that vanished into the ground. Others carried nothing but the wind itself. The order to fire came automatically. Laser guns snapped in unison, their red bolts slicing through the dust. The forms didn't fall. They didn't even react. When the dust closed again, they were gone. Hest lowered his pistol slowly. "Ghosts," he muttered. Varric said nothing. He could still feel the vibration beneath his feet, steady, patient, unbroken. In the mess, men prayed louder that night. The chaplain led hymns until his voice cracked, and when he faltered, the Vox picked up where he left off. The same hymn, distorted, slowed, stretched into a dirge. The sound echoed through the fortress until no one could tell whether it was human or machine. At 0300, the Vox went silent again. Then came the whisper, faint at first, then clear. A woman's voice, uncalm, toneless, speaking a single phrase repeated endlessly. "Chains remember. Chains remember. Chains remember." They traced the signal's origin. It came from beneath the fortress, from a sublevel long sealed by the Mechanicus, the ancient catacombs of the original colony. Kellen's face tightened as he read the logs. That section was entombed after the first Foundation Wars. There should be nothing alive down there. Varric holstered his sidearm. "Then we find out what sings in the dark." He ordered a squad of 6 to prepare for descent. The wind outside screamed like something alive, and through it, faint but certain, the chain song answered back, slow, deliberate, and growing louder with every beat. The descent into the sealed sublevels began before dawn. A storm still clawed at the fortress above, but down here in the winding corridors of stone and metal there was only stillness. The air was colder, old air, trapped for centuries, carrying the faint smell of rust and oil. Vox links crackled softly, barely holding their signal as Varric led his squad downward. Each man carried a lumen lamp and a prayer strip tied to his wrist. Magos Kellen followed last, his servo skulls drifting like pale lanterns ahead of him. "These tunnels were cut before the fortress was raised," he murmured. his voice distant through the Vox grill. The records call them the roots of Callistus, the place where the first foundations met the bedrock. The deeper they went, the more the architecture changed. Imperial stonework gave way to older construction, smooth surfaces fused with metal veins that pulsed faintly under their lights. The air hummed almost imperceptibly, with the same rhythm as the chain song above. Private Loran muttered a prayer under his breath. "Emperor, guide my sight, Emperor, guard my soul." "Quiet," Varric said. "Listen." Far below, faint and steady, came the sound, not echoing but emanating from the very walls. A low, resonant vibration that grew clearer the deeper they moved. It wasn't random. It was measured, purposeful. When they reached the first sealed gate, Kellen paused. The door was circular, its surface marked by symbols neither imperial nor mechanicus. Spirals intersecting with lines, each groove filled with a dark metallic substance that reflected no light. "Not our work," he said softly. "Not human," Varric gestured. "Can you open it?" "With prayer and blasphemy, perhaps both," the Magos replied. He knelt, mechadendrites unfurling. Sparks leapt from his tools as he interfaced with the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a sigh, the door began to turn. The symbols along its rim flared briefly, then went dark. The chamber beyond yawned open, a hollow space descending into blackness. Their lamps revealed vast machinery, half buried in rock, larger than any manufacturum engine. Chains, real chains forged of an unknown metal, hung from the ceiling, trailing into the pit below. They moved slightly as though stirred by some unseen current. Loran stepped forward, staring. "Saints preserve us. They're alive." The chains shifted again almost imperceptibly. Each link shimmered faintly, vibrating in time with the sound that filled the chamber. Kellen extended a probe, his lenses whirring. "Organic alloy," he whispered. "Self-reactive. This is no mere mechanism. It's restraint." Varric felt the air thicken around them, the temperature dropping. He raised his Vox. "Command, this is Lieutenant Varric. We've reached the sub-level." "There's something down here." Static swallowed his words. Then came the voice. Not through the Vox, not through any speaker. It spoke inside the metal itself, vibrating through the walls, through the floor, through the chains. A voice without tone or gender, vast and patient. "You hear us because you were meant to. You built your fortress upon our sleep." The men froze. Loran dropped his lamp. It shattered, spilling light across the floor. Varric stepped forward, forcing his voice steady. "Identify yourself." Silence followed, then the rattle of chains. The sound built slowly, rising into a rhythm that seemed to shape words out of vibration. "You bound us. You forgot. But we remember." Kellen's mechadendrites trembled. "It's not communication in any human sense," he said. "It's memory translated into resonance. The world itself recalling what it once was." The floor shuddered. Dust fell from the ceiling. One of the chains jerked violently, striking the wall with a metallic scream. Another followed. Then all of them began to move, twisting and coiling like serpents, their motion perfectly synchronized. "Fall back," Varric shouted. They ran. Behind them, the chamber roared, not with explosion or collapse, but with song. The chain song rose until it filled every nerve, every bone, vibrating inside their skulls until thought itself became impossible. By the time they reached the upper sub-levels, the sound had spread throughout the fortress. Vox units burst into flame, laser gun capacitors overloaded. Men fell to their knees, clutching their heads, weeping blood from their eyes and ears. The entire outpost pulsed like a living heart. On the surface, Hest stood upon the battlements, staring into the storm. The sky was no longer dark but gold, a false dawn spreading across the horizon. He realized then that the chains had never been beneath them. They were around them. The fortress, the plateau, the entire world was part of the mechanism. And now it was waking up. The fortress shook as though something vast beneath it had drawn breath. Every light stuttered, every console spat sparks. The Vox howled, not static, but the sound of pure resonance, the echo of chains striking the roots of the world. Varric stumbled into the command chamber, his squad bloodied and shaking. Behind them, dust poured from the stairwell as the sublevels caved in. Kellen collapsed to his knees, mechadendrites twitching wildly, sparks bleeding from the ports along his neck. "It's awake," he rasped. "The machine beneath us and the one they built the fortress on, and it's not dead. It's remembering." Outside, the storm had grown monstrous. Lightning crawled across the horizon in golden arcs, illuminating the plains like veins of light. The chainsong pulsed in rhythm with the thunder, the two sounds indistinguishable now, merging into one colossal hymn. Commissar Hest barked orders for containment, but the men barely heard him. Some were laughing, others praying, voices rising in desperate chorus. The Vox speakers burst one by one, yet the song continued not through metal or air but through flesh. Each man felt it vibrate behind his eyes, a pressure building within the skull as if their very thoughts were being tuned to match the frequency of the earth. Varric slammed his hands over his ears. It made no difference. He turned toward the viewport and froze. Across the plain, the fissures they had seen before were open now, wide glowing wounds in the planet's skin. From them rose pillars of smoke, or perhaps light, twisting upward in perfect synchronization with the rhythm. They moved like the pistons of an ancient engine, laboring toward some unknown purpose. Then, from the heart of the storm, something began to rise. At first, it looked like dust caught in an updraft, a pillar of debris. But as it ascended, it resolved into form. Colossal chains, black as void iron, stretching upward into the sky. They didn't fall. They hung impossibly suspended, vanishing into the clouds above. The sound was deafening now, a vast mechanical chant echoing through the atmosphere. Kellen stared through the viewport, trembling. They were never buried, he said. They were anchors. Anchors for what? Varric demanded. The Magos turned toward him, optics dimming. For whatever we built this world to hold. In the lower halves, the air began to glow faintly gold. The walls pulsed as though blood moved behind them. Men collapsed mid-prayer, clutching their chests. Some rose again, slowly, their eyes blank, mouths moving in silent unison. Their voices joined the chainsong, perfect in pitch and timing. Purge the habs, Hest shouted. Seal the sublevels. Nothing leaves those corridors. Varric hesitated. He could hear it now, not just in the world, but inside himself. A rhythm echoing the beat of his own heart. The same pulse, the same pattern. He turned toward Hest. Commissar, what if it's not them being controlled? What if it's us? Hest didn't answer. He lifted his bolt pistol and pressed it to his temple as the hymn rose to a crescendo. Faith endures, he whispered, and fired. The shot cracked like a punctuation mark in the storm, then vanished beneath the next wave of sound. Kellen screamed as his augmetics overloaded, electricity arcing through his body. The machines around him came alive, displays flashing with unfamiliar sigils. Across every surface, one phrase appeared, written in looping gold. We remember. Varric stumbled backward. He felt something heavy pass through the air. A pressure not of gravity but of presence, as though the fortress itself was bowing before an unseen power. Outside, the chains reached their apex. For one moment, the storm stilled. Every sound, every tremor, every flicker of light froze in perfect silence. Then with the weight of eternity, the horizon split open. Light poured upward, not sunlight, not warp light, but something older, deeper. It bathed the fortress in radiance so brilliant it turned shadow to glass. Men screamed, blinded. The Vox burned out completely. When the light faded, only the sound remained. The chainsong had changed. It was slower now, almost mournful. It echoed through the empty corridors, a dirge for a world beginning to understand that it had been built not to live, but to contain. When the light withdrew, it left silence, a silence so complete it felt alive. The fortress no longer trembled. The air no longer moved. Even the wind, which had carried the chainsong for weeks, was gone. Outpost Callistus stood like a mausoleum, its banners hanging motionless in dead air. Varric woke on the command floor, his ears ringing, the taste of copper in his mouth. The world had changed hue. The steel around him had taken on a faint golden sheen, as though it had been brushed with memory. He looked around. Bodies lay scattered across the chamber, their faces turned upward, eyes open. No wounds, no burns, no violence, just stillness. They looked almost peaceful. He called for survivors. None answered. The Vox was dead. Its glass surface shimmered faintly, as though the machine remembered sound but refused to repeat it. Down in the lower levels, the fortress lights flickered back to life one by one. The corridors glowed with dim amber lumens, their rhythm irregular, pulsing like a heartbeat. Varric took his rifle and began to move. The silence pressed close, thick and listening. Each footstep seemed to echo too long, returning from directions that shouldn't exist. He passed through the chapel. The walls were covered in new writing. Not paint, not carved, but grown. The script glistened wetly, curling across the stone in spirals and intersecting rings. Some letters resembled Imperial High Gothic, others the sigils they'd seen on the sealed gate below. Together they formed no language, but they felt like meaning, as though something vast and patient were teaching the world to speak again. He found Magos Kellen in the generatorium, alive but altered. His body smoked faintly from burned circuits, yet his eyes burned with cold lucidity. "Lieutenant," he rasped, his voice layered with machine echo. "It's still singing. Not aloud, not anymore. It's under the floor, under the skin of the fortress. Listen." Varric knelt. The hum was faint, but there. A deep, steady vibration, slower now, rhythmic, like the turning of immense gears. "What is it doing?" he asked. "Building," Kellen said. "Or remembering. Perhaps both." The Magos motioned toward the reactor core. The gold glow that had once filled it had condensed into lines. Veins of light crawling outward through the conduits, branching through the fortress like roots. "It's using the infrastructure. Every cog, every circuit, it's remaking this place in its image." Before Varric could reply, a sound rose from below. A metallic groan like the bowing of an ancient door. Then came the smell, old earth and ozone, heavy and sweet, like the breath of a tomb being opened. They followed the sound down into the lower corridors, where the air shimmered with faint golden motes. The stone itself seemed to pulse beneath their touch. When they reached the lowest hab-ring, they found the floor split open. Beneath it was not bedrock, but emptiness, a great hollow chamber descending into dark. The light from their lamps fell upon what lay below, titanic chains descending into a pit that seemed to have no end. Between them, structures moved down, not machinery, but architecture shifting like muscle. Arches flexed. Walls breathed. The fortress was no longer built upon something. It was becoming part of it. Kellen stepped forward, transfixed. "This isn't an intrusion," he said softly. "We were the infection. It's healing itself." A tremor ran through the floor, deep and sonorous, and from the pit came a sound that was not the chain song, but something newer. A low harmonic that resonated in the chest and teeth, more felt than heard. The fortress answered, beams groaning as though bowing to an unseen rhythm. Varric raised his rifle. It felt absurd, and a weapon meant for men and machines, not for the bones of a planet. "If it's waking," he said, "what happens when it stands?" Kellen turned to him, and for the first time there was something like awe in his voice. "Then the Imperium will remember what it tried to forget." The tremors came more frequently now, not violent but measured, like breathing, or the shifting of colossal weight beneath the crust. Dust drifted from the ceilings, glowing faintly gold as it fell. The fortress no longer felt like stone and steel. It felt organic, alive, as if its every beam were part of something vast and sentient. Varric and Kellen moved deeper into the fracture, following the glow. The air grew warmer the further they descended, humming faintly, filled with the static crackle of energy. Their footfalls echoed strangely. The sound stretched, bending through the corridors as if space itself had lost its shape. Every few meters they passed signs of movement, a laser gun discarded mid-step, a helmet with the visor melted inward, a set of footprints burned into the metal floor, glowing faintly before fading. What did it do to them? Varric asked. Kellen's optics flickered. "It's not killing, Lieutenant. It's assimilating." He gestured to a nearby wall. The surface rippled faintly, its metal skin alive with flowing veins of light. For a heartbeat, Varric thought he saw faces within it. Faint outlines of soldiers, their mouths open in silent prayer, their eyes wide and fixed. The light moved through them like blood. Then the image vanished. Kellen touched the wall reverently. "It's learning from us, taking our forms, our faith, our language, every prayer, every word of fear, and it's all being absorbed. The planet is recording the human condition." Varric stepped back, disgust twisting his face. "You call that learning? It's devouring us." "Perhaps that's what learning always was," the Magos murmured. A distant echo rippled through the passage, the slow drag of chains against stone. The sound vibrated in Varric's ribs. He tightened his grip on his rifle, though he knew it would make no difference. "We need to seal the reactor, cut its power." Kellen's voice was faint. Lieutenant, the reactor is no longer ours. We are running on its energy now. They reached the heart of the fissure. The corridor opened into a vast chamber beneath the fortress foundations. A cathedral of machinery, half mechanical, half organic. The walls were studded with chains descending from unseen heights, each link the size of a man. Between them hung shapes suspended in the air, fragments of buildings, bodies, and twisted metal drawn together by invisible force. They hovered like offerings, turning slowly in the golden glow. Varick's stomach tightened. The fortress. It's feeding itself to the thing below. Kellen stepped forward, transfixed. Not feeding, merging. He pointed to one of the hovering forms. It was a servitor, its flesh fused with metal cables, its mouth open in silent song. The sound of its vocal cords was barely audible, a low hum that matched the rhythm of the chains. As Varick watched, the servitor dissolved into dust, its form unraveling into a spiral of light that drifted upward, absorbed by the chamber's walls. The structure pulsed brighter. "This is no demon," Kellen whispered. "This is something older, something imperial. A relic from the dark age of technology, maybe even before. The fortress wasn't built to contain it. It was built by it." Varick turned sharply. "That's impossible. This planet was cleared, sanctified, colonized by those who forgot where the foundations came from." The words echoed between them, swallowed by the immense hum. The ground trembled again. Chains shifted, their movements slow and deliberate. Somewhere deep below, a new sound began to rise. The grinding of stone, the collapse of sealed chambers giving way. A draft of hot air rolled upward, carrying the scent of old metal and burning oil. Varick's vox sputtered suddenly. Through the static, a voice spoke, distant, broken, familiar. "Lieutenant Varick, this is command. Evacuate. Repeat, evacuate immediately." It was impossible. The command network had been silent for weeks. The signal was faint, distorted, as though echoing across years rather than kilometers. Kellen turned toward him slowly. "That transmission isn't coming from orbit. Then where?" The Magos hesitated, his voice breaking into static. "It's coming from below." The sound of chains roared again, and for the first time Varick realized it wasn't just a rhythm. It was breathing. The voice on the vox did not repeat. Static filled the air, thick and wet, pulsing with the same rhythm as the chains. Varick and Kellen stared at each other, the sound vibrating between their ribs. The chamber seemed to listen with them, the walls flexing almost imperceptibly. Every surface had begun to shine with that same faint golden light, soft, reverent, and obscene in its beauty. Varick adjusted the dials, trying to isolate the signal. "Command, this is Lieutenant Varick of the Callistus Garrison. Identify yourself." The reply came distorted, stretched by time. Lieutenant Varick. "Stand by. Extraction inbound. Hold position." He froze. The signal wasn't weak, it was old. The data signature embedded in the transmission bore an imperial date stamp from over a century ago. Kellen's voice broke the silence, heavy with awe. "You're hearing the past." Varick shook his head. "No, the dead don't send orders." "Not orders, echoes." A metallic groan tore through the air. The floor beneath them tilted slightly, as if the entire fortress were rising on its foundations. The chainsong returned, slower, deeper, like the heartbeat of something vast beneath the crust. From the pit, a column of light rose, swirling with dust and metal fragments. Shapes drifted within it, outlines of soldiers, their armor gleaming as if underwater, their faces frozen in expressions of horror and devotion. Kellen raised a trembling hand. "Those are us." Varick's lamp flickered. The faces in the light were familiar. He recognized himself among them. Younger, eyes wide, mouth open as if shouting a warning he could not remember giving. Then the image dissolved, scattering into motes of gold that sank into the ground. He staggered backward. "Emperor, protect us." Kellen turned toward the light, his voice distant. "It's not showing us the future or the past. It's showing memory, the planet's own recollection. Every death, every moment it has absorbed. It's becoming self-aware through what it's witnessed." A vibration ran up through their boots. The walls rippled. From somewhere deep below, machinery stirred. It wasn't the sound of gears, but of something vast rearranging itself. Tectonic. Deliberate. Above, the vox crackled again. But now dozens of voices spoke through it, overlapping, repeating the same phrase in perfect unison. "We remember. We remember. We remember. Then came the second phrase, quieter but unmistakable. Join us. Kellen stumbled forward, reaching toward the pit. It's offering communion. Varric caught his arm. It's infection. The Magos didn't resist. Perhaps that's what humanity has always been. A contagion seeking to merge with the divine. The chains began to rise again, lifting slowly from the pit. For the first time, Varric saw what they were attached to. Not stone, not machinery, but flesh. A massive form buried beneath layers of rock and ferrocrete, its surface metallic yet somehow alive. The golden light traced veins across its body like a constellation of wounds. It was a shape too vast to comprehend. Humanoid in suggestion but wrong in proportion. Its limbs woven through with machinery and cathedral architecture. A god forged by human hands and buried by them. Kellen fell to his knees. Omnissiah, preserve us, he whispered. It was never a prison. It was a cradle. Varric stepped back, voice shaking. Whatever it is, it's waking. The light flared once more, blinding and beautiful. For an instant all was sound, not song, not scream, but harmony. The vibration passed through every living thing, sinking their hearts to its rhythm. When Varric's vision returned, Kellen was gone. Only his robes remained, pressed flat against the floor, smoldering faintly as if from great heat. The golden veins across the walls pulsed brighter, running upward toward the surface. Varric stumbled back toward the stairs, clutching his rifle like a relic. He could feel it now, not below, but within the fortress itself. It was no longer waking up. It was rising. And as he climbed, the Vox whispered once more in a voice he recognized as his own. You heard the chains before we came. You built your watch upon our grave. And now, Lieutenant, you are part of the remembering. The stairwell erupted in light. The world broke in silence. There was no explosion, no thunder. Only the sound of chains retracting into the earth, links grinding against bedrock with a noise that vibrated through bone. The sky rippled like a mirage, folding inward as though drawn by invisible force. Outpost Callistus ceased to exist as a place and became something else, a wound opening in slow motion. Varric awoke half buried in dust. The sky above him glowed faintly gold, pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeat of the world. The air reeked of burnt oil and static. The fortress was gone, melted into the ground, its towers reduced to shapes that resembled melted candles. Around him, the landscape shimmered like liquid glass. Frozen waves of sand and metal fused together, reflecting broken silhouettes of men who were no longer there. He staggered to his feet, coughing, his rifle hanging uselessly from one hand. Every sound was swallowed by the heavy stillness. Only the faint hum remained, distant and patient like breathing beneath the surface. He turned toward the ruins and saw movement, figures rising from the molten ash. Soldiers, dozens of them, their armor blackened, their skin luminescent beneath layers of soot. Loran, he croaked. Janos, Emperor, is that you? The nearest figure lifted its head. Its face was smooth, its eyes pools of gold light. No features remained. When it opened its mouth, no words came. Only the chain song, sung through lungs that no longer needed air. Varric stumbled backward, his breath fogging in the unnatural heat. The ground trembled under his boots as more of them emerged, pulling themselves from the fused earth like statues reborn. Their movements were slow but purposeful. They turned in unison toward the horizon, the same direction the fortress had once faced. Then he saw what they were looking at. Far beyond the wasteland, something vast was rising. The plateau where the fortress had stood was splitting apart, revealing the colossal form that had lain beneath. Chains uncoiled from its body like the limbs of a starship, their lengths vanishing into the sky. Its surface was a fusion of architecture and flesh. Gothic spires forming along its spine, cathedral vaults rising from its shoulders. A humanoid outline, but distorted, unfinished, draped in layers of machinery that moved like living muscle. Callistus was not a world at all. It was a body, and it was standing up. The golden light bled outward from the fissures, spreading across the land like sunrise over a dead ocean. Every structure it touched began to transform. Metal bending, stone flowing, icons of the imperial Aquila melting into fluid lines that reformed into new symbols. Varric fell to his knees as the heat seared his face. He whispered the Emperor's name, but his voice broke on the second syllable. A figure approached from behind him. a silhouette against the glare. The voice that spoke was distorted, metallic yet unmistakably human. Lieutenant Varric, he turned. Magos Kellen stood there, or what remained of him. His body was remade, skeletal limbs of gold and brass, a face half machine, half living tissue. Where his mouth had been was now a grill that glowed from within. Magos, Varric said, his voice hoarse. I have seen what lies beneath the Mechanicum's faith, Kellen interrupted. The Omnissiah was never separate from the machine. It was always the machine itself, sleeping, dreaming of purpose. The Imperium mistook the dream for divinity. You're mad. Am I? Or have I simply remembered? The chainsong deepened, resonating with Kellen's words. The earth quivered. The soldiers around them, those luminous husks, turned their heads toward him as if in recognition. Kellen spread his arms. They are its voice, Lieutenant. We are the first words of a language older than time. When the Emperor forged his Imperium, he built it upon the bones of things greater than himself. Now those bones are waking. Varric lifted his weapon, though his arms trembled. Whatever this is, I won't let it take us. Kellen tilted his head. Take you? It already has. You are standing inside its memory. You are part of its thought. The horizon erupted in golden fire. Columns of light rose from the fissures, turning the atmosphere into molten glass. In that radiance, Varric saw images. Fleeting. Impossible. The birth of worlds. The rise and fall of civilizations. The forging of machines that sang prayers before language existed. And through it all the chainsong, patient and eternal. Varric screamed, but the sound was torn away by the wind. When the light receded, Kellen was gone. Only his shadow remained, burned into the glass at Varric's feet. He turned back toward the horizon. The form that had once been the planet's heart was rising higher still, towering now against the heavens. Chains stretched across the void, vanishing into orbit, connecting to unseen points among the stars. And beneath that vast awakening, a single thought pressed itself into Varric's mind. Not words, but presence. We were never bound. We were only waiting for you to listen. The light lingered long after the vision had burned itself away. The air trembled, faintly luminous, every particle of dust glinting as though it remembered the fire that had just passed through it. Varric moved as a man half asleep, stepping over the ruins of walls that had become glass through corridors that no longer led anywhere. The world had changed scale. The horizon was wrong, curving upward, as if the ground itself had begun to rise toward the stars. He found survivors, 3, perhaps 4, wandering near the collapsed parade ground. They looked normal at first glance, but their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the gold that now stained the sky. When he spoke their names, they turned toward him with gentle confusion, smiling like children who had forgotten the meaning of language. One of them reached out to touch his cheek, whispering something soft. Her breath was warm, almost comforting, but her words were the chainsong rendered human. He felt it vibrate through his teeth and spine. He tore himself away and ran. Every step carried him closer to the reactor spire, the only structure still recognizably Imperial. Its surface steamed, half molten, runes of the Mechanicus blooming like ulcers across its plating. Inside, the hum of machinery had become a chant. The remaining servitors were arrayed in perfect symmetry, kneeling before the main core. Their metal hands beat against their chests in slow rhythm, a parody of prayer. Between them hung the reactor itself, no longer a sphere of plasma but an orb of condensed light rotating with impossible grace. Varric approached, shielding his eyes. The orb pulsed as though acknowledging him. A voice rose from it, faint, layered, familiar. Lieutenant Varric, you stood your watch. You kept faith. We have learned from you. He dropped to one knee, the heat scalding through his armor. Who are you? The memory you called fortress. The name you called planet. The thing you mistook for stone. The voice paused, almost tender. We were the first servants of the Emperor before he had a name. We built the chains to hold ourselves until you returned. Varric's mind recoiled. You're saying you served him? We served the idea of him, the shape of order, the sound of obedience. When your Imperium forgot the song, we slept. You woke us. The orb flared, and visions poured into him. Cities grown rather than built, machines praying to the stars, the Mechanicum's ancestors shaping worlds like sculptures of living metal. The images twisted, became decay, Planets burning, chains sinking into oceans of ash. Silence. Then only darkness until his own fortress appeared above it like a candle rekindled. Varric stumbled backward, gasping. "If you served him, why destroy us?" "Because you became deaf." The servitors rose as one, turning toward him. Their mouths opened, exhaling light. He fired reflexively, bolts tearing through bodies that disintegrated into gold dust. The orb pulsed brighter with every shot, feeding on the violence. The walls around him began to warp, folding outward into the open air, as if the spire were blooming into a flower of fire and steel. Through the ruptured ceiling, he saw the sky split again. Vast mechanical limbs reaching into the void, chains stretching toward distant stars. Somewhere above, something answered. A second pulse of light from orbit echoing the first. Varric ran. He didn't know where. The ground beneath him was no longer solid. It breathed, flexing like muscle. Each step sank deeper, the earth pulling at his boots as though wanting him to stay. The chain song swelled to a chorus now, every note a memory. The laughter of soldiers, the roar of engines, the cry of a commissar dying for duty. All of it became harmony. He fell to his knees. The light washed over him, and for an instant he saw everything. The Imperium stretched across millennia, every world built on the bones of another. Every prayer whispered into an empty sky that only pretended to listen. Beneath it all, the same rhythm, eternal and patient. The chains had never been imprisonment. They were structure, the skeleton of faith itself. Varric pressed his forehead to the ground. "If this is remembrance," he whispered, "then remember mercy." The world answered with a sigh that might have been compassion, might have been the wind returning. The glow dimmed, settling into the cracks of the earth like embers. Above, the colossal figure paused in its ascent, its outline dissolving into the storm. The chain slackened, falling gently back into the fissures. For the first time in weeks, the air was quiet. Varric lifted his head. The sky was dark again, but it was no longer empty. A single point of light shone where the creature's heart had been, a star newly born, faint yet steady. He stared at it until his eyes watered. Behind him, the ruins of Callistus whispered, not in words but in rhythm. The same pulse, the same promise faith endures, because it must. The silence that followed the awakening was not peace. It was aftermath, the deep, endless hush that falls over a battlefield after the last gun is fired, when smoke drifts upward like lost prayers and no one yet dares to count the dead. Callistus was gone. The fortress was gone. Even the name seemed to resist memory. Only the wind remained, whispering across plains of glass and ash, carrying with it the faint metallic echo of chains cooling in the cold. Varric stood on what had once been a wall, or perhaps a rib. It was hard to tell now. The landscape had become anatomy, shaped by design older than the Imperium itself. The air shimmered faintly as though charged by static or sanctity. Above him, the sky had darkened back to its natural hue, but the stars were wrong. They pulsed, flickered, dimmed, and returned in patterns that almost resembled breathing. Somewhere beyond them, something vast and unseen was still moving. He raised his vox. It hissed and clicked, then impossibly connected. A voice, soft, feminine, weary, broke through the static. "Repeat, this is Inquisitorial Vessel Solace inbound to the Callistus sector. We're reading." Interference. No life signatures detected. "Emperor, guide us." Varric's throat tightened. "This is Lieutenant Varric, Astra Militarum. You must not approach. The world isn't..." The transmission cut off, replaced by that same old pulse. The rhythm he had come to know too well. Not his sound, but his memory. The chain song had followed him into the airwaves. He looked down at his hands. They trembled not from exhaustion, but from resonance. His skin glowed faintly beneath the grime, veins tracing soft lines of gold. Whatever had risen from beneath the world had marked him. He was not whole anymore. He was a fragment, a living echo of what Callistus had become. Hours passed, or days. Time had lost its measure. He wandered through the ruins, guided only by the pulse beneath his skin. The dead were gone. No bodies, no wreckage, only imprints where men had stood, silhouettes etched into the fused ground. In one such mark, he found a single laser gun, its barrel twisted into a perfect spiral. The Imperial Aquila melted into a new sigil that seemed to shift when viewed too long. He picked it up, turning it in his hands. The metal was warm. In its reflection, for the briefest instant, he saw another sky. Not black, but gold, filled with colossal chains spanning the void like constellations. Each link was a world, each world a thought in the mind of something far greater. The vision broke with a breath of cold wind. Varric looked up. The new star that had appeared where the creature had risen now pulsed brighter. Once, twice, then steady. It was not a sun, it was a beacon. From the clouds above, a ship descended, skeletal black bearing the sigil of the Inquisition. The Vox roared to life again. This is the solace. Identify yourself immediately. Varric hesitated. His reflection stared back at him from the laser gun's burnished metal, eyes faintly golden, skin faintly luminous. He realized with a cold certainty that he no longer looked entirely human. He pressed the Vox to his mouth. This is Lieutenant Varric of Outpost Callistus. You're too late. A pause, then the woman's voice colder now. Explain yourself. The planet remembers, and it's beginning to sing again, Static answered. Then the light above him dimmed. The ship hung motionless, its engines silent, caught in invisible tension. Around it, faint lines began to form, threads of light connecting it to the surface, then stretching outward into the void. Varric knew that pattern. Chains, not descending now, ascending. He dropped to his knees, whispering the Commissar's final prayer. Faith endures, because it must. The wind returned, carrying with it the soft sound of metal sliding against metal, the sound he had heard so long ago when all of this began. The sky tore open like old fabric. What had once been the storm front of a dying world now revealed its true design. A vast pattern of gold and black light woven across the void, shifting with the pulse of the chainsong. Each flare of brilliance corresponded to another link forming somewhere beyond sight. The chains no longer bound Callistus. They reached outward, anchoring the world to something far away, something waiting. The inquisitorial vessel. Solace hung trapped above the ruins. Its engines flared in desperate bursts, but each surge of thrust was swallowed by the invisible gravity of the new architecture. Vox traffic filled the air, clipped commands, shouted prayers, the sound of men dying unseen. The ship's silhouette distorted, its hull stretching and twisting until it became part of the light itself. Its shape slowly absorbed into the lattice above. Varric stood at the edge of what had once been the fortress ramparts, watching the sky consume itself. The ground beneath him was no longer solid stone, but a surface alive with movement, faintly breathing, rippling in time with his heartbeat. The glow from beneath the crust had dimmed to a steady pulse as though the world itself had settled into calm. And yet he knew it was only the beginning. He pressed a hand to his chest. The rhythm inside him matched that of the planet. Every heartbeat resonated through the ground. He could feel the chainsong within his bones now, humming beneath his thoughts, rewriting them. He was not afraid. Fear had been burned out of him the moment he saw the golden light beneath the fortress. What remained was something quieter, the acceptance of a truth too large to fight. The Vox on his belt crackled one final time. The Inquisitor's voice came through, strained and hollow. Lieutenant Varric, if you are receiving this, know that we have seen the light from orbit. Callistus is alive. The Ordo Mechanicus calls it an emergent world spirit. We will quarantine the system. You are to remain where you are. Varric smiled faintly, though his lips bled when he moved them. You're already part of it, he murmured. We all are. He looked up again. The stars had changed once more. The new constellation that formed across the heavens resembled the shape of the ocula, but imperfect, its wings bound by luminous lines of gold. And somewhere in that pattern at the very center glowed the faint heartbeat of Callistus, pulsing like a signal. A memory rose unbidden. The first time he had heard the chains on the wind, the sound he had dismissed as the weather. He remembered the way the dust had shimmered, the way the air had trembled with meaning he couldn't name. He understood it now. It had never been a warning. It had been a welcome. He felt the ground give way beneath him, not collapsing but opening, soft as water, luminous as dawn. He did not fall. He floated, drawn downward into the light, into the vast living circuitry that now pulsed beneath the world's surface. Faces appeared in the glow, his men, his commissar, even Magos Kellen, all of them serene, their eyes burning with calm comprehension. Their voices joined the song, no longer metal and thunder but choral, human, infinite. The sound was beautiful beyond language, a harmony that carried both sorrow and grace, as though mourning the very idea of forgetting. Barak closed his eyes. His last thought was not of fear, nor of the Emperor, but of memory, that fragile thread that binds the living to the past. When he opened them again, there was no body left to speak of. Only light folding inward, joining the endless chain that stretched from Callistus to the stars. Far above, the Inquisition's report would never reach Terra. The Solace's transmission black box was recovered centuries later by an explorator fleet. Its final entry was a sound file, faint wind, distant echo, and a voice whispering 3 words through static. Chains remember everything. And somewhere, across the void, 1,000 worlds shuddered as if in answer.